Welcome back to Black News Tonight. Feminism has been one of the most impactful and important global social movements of the 20th and 21st centuries. Although the fight for gender equality has been gaining more visibility, when it comes to acknowledging the lack of diversity within the movement, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. With the goal of highlighting that lack of diversity and the importance of intersectionality within the feminist movement, the award-winning scholar Kyla Schuller wrote her most recent book. It's called The Trouble with White Women, a Counterhistory of Feminism. Here to talk about the book and much more is Kyla Schuller. She is the author, and she's also a professor of women's gender and sexuality studies at Rutgers University. Welcome to the show, Dr. Schuller. You mentioned that white feminism is a form of politics. Help my audience understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, what I mean is that it's an ideology, right? It's a political position. So a white person who's a feminist is not necessarily a white feminist, right? Instead, white feminism is a particular kind of feminism that says feminism has one goal and one goal primarily, and that is to eradicate sex equality. The problem with saying that feminism is just about sex equality is that it relegates every other form of oppression, from racism to climate injustice to homophobia to wild wealth inequality, as secondary to the goals of feminism. And that means that it ends up becoming a project that reinforces whiteness and the privileges and rights of white women at the expense of everybody else.
So what's the antidote to that? How do we develop a movement that takes seriously the impact of patriarchy, the impact of misogyny, the impact of sexism, male domination in all forms and fashions? How can we keep track of that and do something about it without making that singular in our focus?
Happily, we have many models and examples, and that for just as long as there's been a history of the kind of feminism that says the only goal is white women's rights, is that there's been another history of feminism that in the late 1980s was named intersectional feminism by the Black feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. But happily, that form of feminism has existed since the 1840s and 1850s. And what I show in this book, like many others have shown, including many Black feminist historians for decades, are reminding us that for every person like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who says, I deserve rights because my ancestors came from the Mayflower, there were other women like Harriet Jacobs or Frances Harper, or Black women who argue that there is no justice without fighting for the rights of formerly enslaved women and men, and rights to land, liberty, property, happiness. Happily, we don't have to reinvent a notion of feminism that's more expansive. We have 170 years of Black women creating that project.
You say that your book is a counter-history of white feminism. Counter-histories are necessary. We always have to tell things differently. We have to correct historical records. We have to offer a different analysis. What's the most important sort of thing that we should reconsider about the history of feminism, and particularly the history of white, maybe even liberal feminism?
Yeah, so in the book, I call it a counter-history because I do a sweep of women's rights movement from the beginnings in the US in the 1840s up to the present, and show how at every step there was a leading icon who we know today, like Betty Friedan or Margaret Sanger, or Sheryl Sandberg today. But at the same time, there was another feminist fighting from intersectional perspective that didn't think that putting a white woman in charge would sanctify the systems of hierarchy, would make everything instantly more equal. One thing that really stands out is a famous critique that Bell Hooks made in one of her first books. She published in the early 1980s when she was still in her early 20s. And she was critiquing Betty Friedan's famous book of The Feminine Mystique that wanted to liberate the housewife. And what she said is, the problem with that model of feminism, of liberating the housewife and sending her to the corporate offices in Manhattan, isn't that that model just ignores the existence of other women, especially working class women. It's that it actually sacrifices working class women to the aspirations and goals of the future corporate women leaders. Right? As Betty Friedan argued, we need white women housewives to go to the office and then have instead working class women taking care of their houses, doing their dishes, looking after their children, getting their groceries. And that's the true problem with white feminism, is that it doesn't just ignore the existence of other people. It actually sacrifices women of color, especially, to white women's aspirations.
There's a way that we can talk about white liberal feminism as being misdirected or misguided, as having too much of an ideological focus on a raceless gender category. There's a way that we can say that it's bound up in sort of capitalist ideals, you know, the Sheryl Sandberg lean-in models and such. I hear all of that, but there's also an argument that this is just racism, right? That inside of the liberal feminist movement, there's simply anti-blackness, that there's simply not just a lack of consideration, but an outright animus toward black people, black women, black femmes, black girls, etc. How do we account for white supremacy and racism and anti-blackness in this history, or in this understanding of history?
Yeah, I think white feminism comes in many forms of politics, which is one of the biggest surprises I had in researching this book. There's certainly white liberal feminism, which can include a lot of racism, as you rightly point out. For example, like we saw the first time Obama ran for president, and how many white women were voicing really quite racist things in that primary, white liberal women. But another big shock I had is how much what feminism is flourishing in hard right movements, including active forms of white supremacy. And that's actually been true for 100 years, but remains quite true today, that white supremacist groups like Stormfront will have feminist discussion topics, right? Ivanka Trump claimed that her father was a feminist on the campaign trail. Feminism can be so much as a defense of the purity and virtue of white women that it actually becomes a ready partner of explicit racism.
Would we go so far as to say that these people are embracing a form of feminism that is troublesome, or will we say they're not really feminists? I don't know if that's even appropriate to say, but at what point do we say this can't even be feminism?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as much as I want to say these people aren't feminists, my political instincts tell me if we do that, we will just pretend that feminism is a much tidier, happier, more justice-filled place than it is. One of the most shocking things I found was that today, 42% of the people who vote Republican identify as feminists. That tells us that it is no small number of people who think that white supremacy and hard right political positions go hand in hand with feminism. I think what we need to do is recognize that there are multiple competing forms of feminism, and we need to out-organize white feminism. I think if we pretend it doesn't exist, we actually we give away. We lose a hand in our battle of recognizing what we actually are up against.
Dr. Schuller, thank you so much for joining me on the show. We really appreciate that, everybody. The book is called The Trouble with White Women, A Counterhistory of Feminism. It's available now in all major bookstores, but I always tell you, make sure you purchase your book from an independent or black bookstore.